I'm Alan Wartes, and this is Think Radio Presents Think Planet. In this week's episode, I'll present part one of my great conversation with Norwich University professor of creative writing, Prentiss.
So one of two things happened with Abbey. Either he spoke without a filter, and he said some things that I would never say. But that doesn't make him a bad human. So no one person is limited by the worst of their actions.
Welcome to another great conversation on Think Radio.
Think Planet is made possible by support from the Western Colorado University School of Environment and Sustainability, empowering future change agents to foster ecologically resilient, economically sustainable, and socially just communities throughout the world.
If you like Think Planet, then I know you'll enjoy the other shows in the Think Radio Presents family of podcasts. Think People, a celebration of just how amazing people can be. Think Business, a weekly discussion with entrepreneurs, innovators, and disruptors on sustainable business into the 21st century. Subscribe to Think Radio Presents on iTunes, YouTube, or wherever else you get great content. And don't forget to help us spread the word by liking our social media channels and sharing the content we post. We're grateful to have you in the conversation on Think Radio Presents. Prentiss is the author of Finding Abbey, a search for Edward Abbey and his hidden desert grave. It's an award-winning memoir about Edward Abbey, but perhaps even more so about the search for home and belonging and a sense of place that we all share. Finding Abbey won the 2015 National Outdoor Book Award and was a finalist for the New Mexico-Arizona Book Award, the Vermont Book Award, and the Colorado Book Award. A graduate of Western Colorado University, Prentiss spends part of the year in his cabin in the woods above Pitkin, Colorado. I'm really happy to have you with me today. Thanks for joining me.
Oh, it's a great pleasure to be back in Gunnison and talking with you.
Well, back in Gunnison, that's a good point. I mean, you've spent some hard time living in the city, right? And coming back here is a big deal for you.
Yeah, this is my alma mater. I came out here in 91, graduated in 94, but my brother moved out here and I built a little cabin out in Pitkin. This is one of my favorite spots in the universe.
Yeah, why? What is it about this place that keeps bringing you back?
I grew up in Pennsylvania, and I love that East Coast landscape. I live in Vermont now, and that feels deeply like home. It feels deeply of what I'm made of. And then I remember coming out here, and this is nothing like that landscape. And Pennsylvania is dark and tight and rich soil. And here it's the exact opposite. The soil, at times, I used to be a trail builder, and I'd dig in the soil. I mean, it could be a 1/4 inch thick. And up in Pitkin, we're trying to rehab some of our land, and I mean, there's literally no topsoil there.
They don't call it the Rocky Mountains for nothing.
No, it's a rock and dust and a lot of big, giant views. Back east, you can climb a peak and not be sure if you're dropping down the east or west side, and you can get really disoriented because it's so tight. Here, you get up to a peak and you look and you're like, oh, that's that, that's that, that's that. You can see your whole world. And then the other part is the West tests you in different ways. You know, the East, and again, my heart is there on so many levels, but it's kind of a gentle, old, weary, worn-out landscape.
Well, the Appalachians have been there a long time. They've been subject to weathering and time, and in a way that the Rocky Mountains are only just getting started.
Yeah, my mountains, the Kitatinis, which are a part of the Appalachians, are the 9th oldest in the world.
Yeah.
And the Rockies are just young kids.
So rounded corners, soft, gentle valleys. Yeah, it's a different experience.
Yeah.
Well, the West tests you. I love that phrase because I think anybody who's ever spent any amount of time in the West would agree with that.
Yeah.
Whether it's climate or landscape or the kind of people that tend to congregate here. And so I want to talk today mostly about a book that you've written called Finding Abbey, referring to Ed Abbey, a great environmentalist and writer. And I find it interesting that your book came out just a couple of years before the 50th anniversary of the publication of Desert Solitaire.
Yep.
This sort of, not only is it mandatory reading for a lot of environmental studies students and also writers, but even if it weren't mandatory, people flock to that book again and again. What did you set out to do with this book? I mean, the title implies Finding Abbey, but put us in your mind as you sat down and said, I'm going to write this book. Here's what I want to do.
The beginning was my friend Steve Coughlin, a phenomenal poet. He said, I have the book for you. And when you leave an MFA program, either you leave with a book in progress, which is what you should do, or you don't, which is what I did. And you need to have a book to be someone in this field. And he said, I've got the book for you. You're going to go searching for Abbey's hidden grave. And if you know nothing about Abbey, when he died, his friends put him in the back of a pickup truck, drove out into some great desert, dug a hole in the ground, and buried him there. And it's this iconic mystery, I guess.
Really a fitting end to his life, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, and his tombstone has 2 words on it besides his name and his dates, and it's just no comment. After a life of talking, a life of writing, that's it. And so the idea was to go searching for his grave, but hopefully I wrote a decent book, and any good book has what it's about, which I call the river above, but then why does that matter, the river below? And for a while I didn't have a river below. I was merely thinking about, okay, I chase after Abbey's grave. Why does that mystery matter?
This could be a cool adventure, but what else?
It's a cool story around a campfire. And then I was living in northern Idaho, and I moved to a city in Michigan. And you were talking about doing hard time. I moved to one of the best small cities in America. And if you love cities, move to this city. It's perfect. I struggle hemmed in by roads and lack of green space that is not just mowed parks and stoplights everywhere. And I moved there, and I moved there for a wonderful job at a wonderful university. And it was a sort of job that I could have retired from, and I would have had a great career. And I just couldn't find happiness there. And it had nothing to do with the people, but it was not my place. And I talked about being from Pennsylvania, being tested out here. And it's like going on a date with someone. You know pretty quickly if this is going to work or not. Is there going to be a second date? And I had committed to marrying this place, and it was not working. And I was trying to figure out what to do. And is this just me and I need to suck it up? Or is there something bigger? So I figured, all right, this is why I go searching for Abbey's grave. And it's not about finding the grave. The grave doesn't matter. It's a physical thing. It's an adventure. But what matters is, as I'm going looking for that grave, I can go looking for who Abbey was. He spent his life moving all over the place. As a kid, he grew up during the Depression. His family was dirt poor. He was born in Home, Pennsylvania, but he lived in other spots as well. And then as an adult, he lived all across the West, but also in North Carolina for a very short period of time. He would move to Hoboken in New York City for very short periods of time. He moved to, I think, Massachusetts for a couple of weeks. And he was always searching for home. So I thought, I'll interview him through his texts, through his books, and see what he says about home. And then I'll talk to his friends to see what they can teach me. And then in the end, I see Finding Abbey is about a search for who Edward Abbey was, where his hidden grave is, but more importantly, what home is. And that's when I knew I could write the book, when I knew what the river below was.
Well, so let's go back and take that apart, because you've laid out 2 or 3 different objectives there. Let's go with the simplest. Finding this grave. It's hidden for a reason. Only those 4 people who drove him out there knew where it was. People have looked for it. Did you find it?
So I'll say yes, and what I mean by yes is when you go searching for something, it doesn't matter if you found it or didn't find it. What matters is that search. And if you authentically search for something, like people search for God, people search for home, people search for love, and it's that quest that transforms you. So I'm going to give a cop-out answer, and yes, of course I found it. And what did I find?
I was going to challenge you on that rather cop-out answer there.
I found so many answers, and my other cop-out answer is read the book. And
right.
And then my third cop-out answer will be, doesn't matter what I found at the end of the journey. And we all know this. What matters is, going through those steps of our lives and reflecting on that and talking to other people and growing as a result of that. So searching for Abby's grave, I found so many different things, and the book will illuminate some of them, and so many of them are just in my heart and in my mind.
Right. And it always brings up the question, any adventurer that sets out to attain a specific goal, I'm going to climb that peak, I'm going to find that treasure that's in that sunken ship. There's always the moment of, if they do succeed at that goal, the question arises, now what? But if you do what you've done, and that is to make the search about so much more, then you can never really be disappointed. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, and the interesting thing is, I didn't care if I found the grave. I cared that I authentically searched for it. But I had friends, House from the book and my wife, who both actively did not want me to find it. And House from the book, he went on the journey with me, and he actively searched for it while actively not wanting to find it. And my wife, we were dating back then, or just starting to date, and I called her on the phone right before I went into the desert, and she's like, I hope you don't find it.
And why not? Why do you think some people have that point of view?
Mystery is more beautiful than answers. And if science solved all the answers, science would lose its magic. If we knew about the truths behind religion, there'd be all the magic gone. It's in that faith, it's in that search. And for me, that's the beautiful part. So I think for House and my wife, the idea of me finding it, there's one less mystery out there.
Yeah.
And now I put a tack on the map and say, that's where it is, and you can go there now. Yeah. And it's more exciting for them to conceive of it being out there, and they can go look for it or not.
Well, and Abbey himself would be horrified, because we would build a paved road, right, to get to the graveside, and people would visit it the way he decried in Desert Solitaire what was happening to arches, for instance.
And it has happened to arches.
I mean, it was very prophetic what he wrote. So I find that interesting. But that's implied in the title of the book. It's called Finding Abbey, not Abbey Found. It's progressive. So let's unpack then the second set of goals that you set out to do, and that was to discover what it means to be at home. Am I characterizing that right? Is that what you just said? What did you learn? What takeaways? Because I was struck when you were talking about being in a place that's not yours, being in a relationship with somewhere that it's obviously not speaking to you. That describes a lot of people. That's not just Sean Prentiss. That's a lot of people. So what did you find that you could share with them right now?
Well, I found one thing then, and I found one thing maybe this past summer. So I'll share both of them. But what I discovered is that career is one thing, and career is so important to me. I love teaching. And I thought that if I left my city and I left my university, I might be done teaching. Then I'd have to find a new job, probably one that didn't fill my heart as much. But what I realized was a career is great, and it brings so much to me. But what matters is being with the people I care the most about, in the places I care the most about, because my roots need to sink into that soil. And it could be they go horizontal like out here, or they go vertical like they do back east. But place is one of the most important things to me, and it's more important than money. It's more important to career satisfaction. So I realized that I needed to quit my job and go somewhere else, even if that meant giving up my career entirely. And I got very lucky, because a university in a spot that is now home and immediately felt like home, that job popped up at the exact right time. And I was making a decision, and I applied to this one job because I didn't want to move anywhere but where I wanted to move. And I ended up in northern Vermont, and it's a transformative experience. I go home, and I am home. But then the second thing I learned, and I only learned this after I had my daughter, and my wife gave me a Christmas present. She gave me a Long Trail guidebook. It's this little tiny book, and I knew it was a book under the wrapping. And I opened it up, and all the book tells you is where there's water, where there's towns, where there's a junction. So it's not a fun book to read. And I knew with my new daughter, I didn't have time to go hike the Long Trail. And she said, I always tell her I'm part coyote. And what that means is I need some time to just run around. And if you just give me a little bit of freedom, I'll come and I'll howl outside the house. And she said, I'm going to let you be a coyote. And this summer, you're going to hike the Long Trail. And it was the most powerful gift anyone could give me, because what she wants most is to have me next to her. But she recognized that I've got to be a little bit wild. So she gave me this, and then I went out on the trail, and I'd go out for 3-4 days. And when I was out on the trail always felt like home. I've hiked the Colorado Trail. I've spent a year worth of nights building trails in the Pacific Northwest and Desert Southwest, and it was always my home. If my tent was there, that was my home. And now when I'm on the trail, I know that's not my home. My home is where my wife and daughter are. And that was not something I learned through Finding Abbey. That was something I learned beyond that place matters. But those are my people.
Yeah, so a lot has been said and written about the mobility of the American society. I mean, we're expected to move multiple times in the course of a career. If I understand what you're saying is, be careful when you make those decisions about where you're going to live, that you're doing it based on more than just where the highest salary is, that there are other things to consider. Did you, in the course of researching and writing Finding Abbey, see something of that philosophy in him as well?
Yeah. And to start with your earlier idea, I've lived or worked in 16 states and 2 countries. So about a third of the U.S. I've been employed in. And, so I've followed, I would hate to call what I did when I was younger careers, but jobs and opportunities and excitements. But Abbey did the same thing. He went and taught, I think it was at Western Carolina, and he was there, I think, a half a semester. And he quit right in the middle of the semester, which no one does. But he's like, this is not my place. I am out of here. And he lived in Hoboken, and he wrote a lot about the city and calling it a cancer. And he would race back out to Moab, race back out to Tucson. So he experienced this throughout his life. And I'm never entirely sure if he ever found one spot that was his spot. But I guess he would say it's the desert. And that could be in Moab, that could be in Tucson, or it could be elsewhere. But as long as he's in that desert, he's home.
I suspect that the desert really speaks to you as well. Mm-hmm. I mean, you spent a lot of time there. What is it about the desert West that has this almost mystical effect on people?
My father-in-law is a painter, and he talked about the colors. And I'm not great at this, but I think blue and orange are on opposite ends of the color spectrum, which I don't even know what that exactly means. But I know that when I'm in Grand Gulch or Cane Gulch or Bullet Canyon and I'm looking at that sandstone with that brilliant western sky, there's something powerful there. And then when I'm in that same spot and I reach down and there's a corn cob that's 900 years old, there's something really powerful there. And when you see these relics on the walls, these paintings, and I'm not sure what they mean. There's some story. I love telling stories, and I love hearing stories. And I love the mystery of, what are these stories? What are they trying to tell me? And then, all this is about environment. Where did these people go? Why did they leave? And
how did they live here to begin with?
How did they live there to begin with? It is a rough, hard spot. Yeah. But it seemed like they also created these thriving cultures.
Yeah. Well, so in the course of sort of retracing Abbey's steps through his relationships, right? It was the people that you met along the way that provided the window for you into who he really was. What were the things that you learned through their eyes that kind of surprised you about this iconic figure?
The biggest one I always come back to was how much they deeply loved him. He's been dead since 1989. So we're looking at, almost 30 years now. And these men and women are deeply connected to his spirit and his intellect in ways that they were moved emotionally. Again, almost 30 years later. And that I found so interesting. The other thing is they were so defensive about who he was and the beauty behind him. So Abbey, people might call him a racist, misogynistic.
Well, they have called him that.
Yeah. And an alcoholic as well. I knew there was a third one. And his friends, to a person, defended him on every one of those levels. And they also complicated some of those. They told me some stories that might explain why this occurred or why that occurred or what he was doing. But I think that defense of him says so much about him. Does that make him non-problematic? No.
Yeah.
But it also, if enough people will defend a person, it says that's a complicated person, and they deserve to be examined and respected for many, many things. So I love that. I just love that passion. And then the other thing was how he transformed the environmental movement with taking anarchism, which is not a lack of rules, but it's a focus on small community. And I was just reading an article about Abbey, and the writer was arguing that he didn't want community, and I think he completely did. He just wanted small community. He wanted rules to be set up for, say, watersheds rather than states or nations. But he took that and he took environmental thought and he blended those two together to get radical environmentalism, and it transformed the environmental movement, and it still
absolutely. I mean, Earth First was born in the shadow of Ed Abbey.
Yeah.
Let's go back to something you just said, though, and that is the idea that a character can be problematic without us being tempted to throw them on the ash heap, right?
Yeah.
There are these people who are willing to defend him against, legitimate claims of some of the things that he said and wrote. Honestly, I think in today's environment, the publisher would probably put his books out of print. He'd be dismissed from any university where he taught or worked. Because that's the environment we've entered. How do we get back to this idea that it's okay to be a multifaceted person? And what can Ed Abbey teach us about how to do that?
We all know our own failings. And, if I look within me and I pretend that I've never done anything repulsive, anything stupid, I would be lying to myself and I'd be lying to you. Do I want to share them on this conversation? No. I'm very happy that I know them. But so one of two things happened with Abbey. Either he spoke without a filter and he said some things that I would never say. But that doesn't make him a bad human. So no one person is limited by the worst of their actions, or at least what I would call the worst of their actions. So that's part of it. And the other part is, was that Ed Abbey saying those things, or was that, I'll call him Cactus Ed, saying those things? And there's a difference between persona and person. And I know at times he would just poke the bear to poke the bear. And sometimes he wanted to poke the bear to change, and sometimes he wanted to poke the bear to hear the bear roar. But we also have to remember that, so we're flawed, we're human. And then 2, we're complex. And then 3, sometimes it's for show. And I don't know which one of those fits Abbey, but I do know that humans have got to be allowed to grow from their mistakes. And so often when someone makes a mistake, we push them out and say, you are ruined and you are done, rather than saying, let me talk to you, let me teach you, let me learn from you, and then bring you back into the discussion and see if we improve. And we do this with prisons as well. I don't want to go off on a wide tangent, but we say, you're bad, we're going to throw you in there, and we're not going to train you, we're not going to improve you.
Well, that's one of the things that I appreciated very much about your book, is that it doesn't shy away from some of the criticisms of Ed Abbey that he did have racist ideas, or at least expressed himself in a way that could lead you to believe that he did, that he didn't treat women very well. But you don't also find the need to pass judgment on that. And that's such a skill that we've lost. I mean, like I say, I think it would be such a tragedy, for instance, if Desert Solitaire and other books that Ed Abbey wrote disappeared from our libraries because we couldn't reconcile the fact that he was a multifaceted person.
And some of those facets are highly problematic, but we can learn from them and we can grow from them. I mean, his views on immigration just didn't work then and they don't work now.
Well, it's fascinating to realize that he was a proponent of a giant wall on the southern border.
For a very different reason than Trump is a proponent of it.
Right, but still,
well,
he might have been. Well, tell me why you say that.
For Abbey, it was about overpopulation,
Uh-huh.
and it was a kind of a stunted view because he was fine with overpopulation occurring south of the border, but not north. And we see that resources, if they're being used on either side of an arbitrary line, are still using up those resources.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, he did seem to have concern with the culture of Mexico and Central and South America, which would probably mirror some of Trump's views. But a lot of Abbey's stuff was environmentally based, and most of Trump's views are not environmentally based.
To say the least.
Yeah.
But that brings up an interesting point, and that is that Abbey, as you've pointed out, created or helped foster at least radical environmentalism, which tends to be sort of a hard line.
Mm-hmm.
It does not do what we've just been saying, and that is account for a lot of different colors in the palette.
Yeah.
A lot of different ways of looking at land use, a lot of different ways of looking at extraction, for instance, and so forth. And yet, he enjoined his followers to be like him and to be what did he call himself? A reluctant enthusiast, right?
A part-time
something, and a half-hearted fanatic.
Yeah.
All right, all of these oxymorons put together. Have we lost that out of his philosophy today, where there seems to be no middle ground, no part-time anything, no half-hearted anything? A, have we lost it in your view? And B, how do we get it back?
Unfortunately, I think right now we have lost it on some level. So I'm thinking what makes radical environmentalism so great is it's so unrelentingly dogmatic in its pursuits. And it says we are not going to bend at all, but you've got to bend. And what it did is it forced the conversation so far that non-radical environmentalism became very normal. And if you say you're a part of the Sierra Club, no one bats an eye, but in the past, they would.
Yeah.
So I think that it by being so radical, it opens up that discussion of a center ground. But we do feel like we've lost that in politics, where we vote on party line regardless of party politics. We would rather have conflicting viewpoints in our party than have a party that really makes sense. And I can see this from both sides, where there's positions that they take that do not fit in there. And the reason they take them on is they just kind of got put in there. And we don't look at holistically who we want to be. But then my hope is, and it goes back to home, I live in an area in northern Vermont that is very mixed politically. And I don't know what my neighbors' politics are exactly. Some of them I have a very clear idea. And with some of them, I very much disagree with their global politics. But then this is what I also know. If I need any help, from someone to watch my daughter on an instant to if I could not pay my mortgage, these people who completely disagree with my politics would be there to protect me and my family.
Which comes back to the idea of small communities.
Small communities.
You can't achieve that with people that live in 3 cities over. It's impossible.
Yep.
But you can with the people who are in your neighborhood.
And that's one of the beauties about Gunnison or Crested Butte or Woodbury, Vermont.
Yeah. Well, in that quote that we've just been talking about, Abbey goes on to say, just don't forget that, yes, okay, save the world, but don't forget to enjoy it.
Yeah.
don't forget that it's also about adventure and fun. What would it take, in your mind, to remind us of that? What do we need to do? What can that person listening to this podcast do right now to begin to reincorporate that idea into how they are on the planet?
Well, one of the things is maybe shut up and listen. So what I mean by that is I have my beliefs and you have your beliefs, and maybe I should listen more to your beliefs and quit trying to win conversations. So just see what beauty you can bring to the conversation. Not being so dogmatic, seeing the mysteries out there. And then, I don't know what comes after this life, but just remember that we have a finite amount of time and only so many days to smile. And I prefer to smile a lot. I wake up in the morning and I'm pretty darn happy, and I go to bed and I'm pretty darn happy. And a lot of it is because, I don't know how many days we have. And I love this life, and I love the community I've built. And it's just remembering that.
So if you could distill that down, it might be to just lighten up.
Yeah, we're not that important.
And although the issues we face are challenging and complex and grave in some cases, lighten up. Enjoy the ride.
Yep.
Well, I really appreciated the book. I hope others will find it. It's Finding Abbey by Sean Prentiss. It's a great read. And thanks for joining me today. It's been a great conversation.
It's a pleasure, Alan.
Thanks for watching. Join us next week for another great conversation on Think Radio Presents Think Planet.